The attacks are escalating against Justin Trudeau, who for the third time as Prime Minister is under an ethics investigation. Conservatives now want the police to look into whether a crime was committed when the government awarded a multi-million-dollar contract to a charity that the Prime Minister's family has ties to, ties that include financial dealings. Trudeau's mother Margaret, his brother Alexandre have both received close to $300,000 in total for speaking at dozens of WE charity events. Now, Finance Minister Bill Morneau has been drawn into the controversy. Two immediate members of his family are involved with the charity, one as a paid employee. But like the Prime Minister, Morneau did not recuse himself from the cabinet decision to give WE this contract. We've got the government House Leader coming up in moments to explain what happened. But first, we want to get reaction from the official opposition, the party calling for a criminal investigation. Andrew Scheer is the leader of the Conservative Party, and he joins me now from Regina. Mr. Scheer, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me back on the show.
Have you sent your letter to the RCMP yet? And if so, have you had a response from the Mounties?
Well, I believe that that's being done today by our Shadow Minister for Ethics, Michael Barrett. We are very concerned at this whole thing here. We want to make sure that information comes to light through a variety of sources. One is, of course, a police investigation. The other one is we're very pleased that the Ethics Commissioner has agreed to look into this. And of course, we want the various standing committees of the House of Commons to be able to do their work as well. So we really do need to get to the bottom of this. We've seen before how Mr. Trudeau tries to block these types of investigations. So we're trying to get out ahead and prevent him from being able to do that.
I think it's pretty easy with the facts that are out in public, or the allegations that are out in public, why this would require an ethical investigation or an ethics investigation. What is it that makes you believe this meets the bar of criminal intent?
Well, when you have a situation where, just to back up a little bit here, we have an example where the Government of Canada designed a program. And after designing a program, a unique program that didn't exist before, they decided to sole source a $1 billion contract to a company that had multiple ties, paying immediate members of his family, of Mr. Trudeau's family, hundreds of thousands of dollars. At first glance, as you mentioned, that's certainly enough to warrant an ethics investigation. There are aspects of the criminal code that talk about using a public office, making decisions that flow from a public office that infer a benefit that can also have a criminality aspect attached to it. And we think that it's important that all avenues here for this scandal are explored.
I do want to clarify one thing, not so much correct you. It's about a $1 billion program. The contract to WE was scheduled to be around $20 million. That's what they would have made, the $900 million or so, what was the value of the program they were going to administer. But on that point, we've also learned today that Minister Morneau's family has links to the WE organization through his daughters, but he didn't recuse himself from the decision either. So going back to this call for a police investigation, how broad do you want this to be?
Well, you know, we believe that the police investigation should err on the side of caution and look at as much as possible. Of course, now that we know new information today that the finance minister himself had a very direct link with this organization, we want to find that out too. And just to go back to the contract, we'd love to see the contract. We'd love to have the ethics committee or perhaps the finance committee have all the details on this. Right now, we have to take the word of people who are currently under investigation. We'd rather see the documents themselves and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And, you know, it's getting to the point where I would challenge Liberal members of Parliament and other Liberal cabinet ministers. Did they know that the Prime Minister was in this position? When Cabinet was signing off on this decision, was Mr. Trudeau open and forthright with his colleagues? Did he inform them what he was asking them to agree to? It's getting to the point where Liberal ministers who may be wanting to run for leader in the future have to ask themselves, how closely do they want to be associated with Justin Trudeau's ethical behavior here?
Well, the ministers we have asked on that have cited cabinet confidentiality or simply not responded on whether or not they knew about this, so we will wait and see on that. But on this point, Yves-François Blanchet, the Bloc leader, has called for the Prime Minister to step down and let Chrystia Freeland, who you just mentioned, take over until the ethics questions are resolved. Given that you think the Prime Minister may have been involved in a criminal act, can he continue to govern?
Well, when Jody Wilson-Raybould testified before the Standing Committee on Justice that her role as independent Attorney General was compromised by the interference of people in the Prime Minister's office, I made the declaration at that point that I did not believe that Justin Trudeau should continue to govern this country. His party won a plurality of seats in the last election, so the party has a right to govern. And again, I would go back and challenge Liberal members and ministers. Do they really want to continue to have Justin Trudeau as their leader? I don't believe Justin Trudeau is going to resign. I don't think he's going to take the blame or take the responsibility. He hasn't in the past. And you talked about the cabinet confidences. When he was investigated by the Ethics Commissioner asked for a broad waiver of cabinet confidences so he could get to the bottom of everything. Mr. Trudeau refused. There are at least 9 witnesses that were prevented from giving full testimony. And I'm worried that we're going to see the same playbook used here, attempts to prevent all the details from coming to light.
You say you want to see documents. We know the various committees of the House are asking for the documents from the department which made the recommendation. The line from the government has been this nonpartisan civil service said, we is the only real option to do this. If the documents are released and show conclusively that this was in fact the recommendation for the civil service, will you be satisfied that everything was done above board, even though there was a financial tie with the Trudeau family?
Look, we will obviously allow these types of investigations to go through their due course, and we've always accepted findings from officers of Parliament like the Ethics Commissioner. The challenge here, though, is that the Liberals designed a program out of, they created something that then they go and say, well, the only people that can administer the program that we just created is this organization that we have all kinds of relations with, of immediate family members collecting big payments. So it's not just a platform for members of the Trudeau family, they're also getting paychecks from this organization. And if that wasn't disclosed to other cabinet ministers, if they hide behind cabinet conferences and prevent things like this from getting out, then it's going to be a disservice to the Canadian people. It's going to be another example of, it's going to be another demonstration of the low regard that Justin Trudeau has for upholding ethical standards. So we're very concerned. One of the things I'm hopeful this time is in the last Parliament, Justin Trudeau used his majority to shut down these investigations. We now have the opposition with a majority on these committees, and we will be able to, if the other parties can agree on this, we will be able to compel the production of these types of documents. So we're hoping that we'll have more tools at our disposal to get to the bottom of it this time than we did last time. This
program was created quickly and not through the normal processes that we'd see if a government was governing during a non-pandemic time, largely in part because of the special powers that were granted to Cabinet to make these kinds of decisions when Parliament was suspended back in March to deal with the pandemic. So given what we've seen about this, does your party and maybe the other opposition parties feel it's time to take away some of those powers from the Cabinet or revisit that decision?
Well, I think it's a very good point that you're bringing up, because you'll remember that in those first few days of the pandemic hitting and the lockdown that followed, Justin Trudeau called Parliament back and said, look, we need some extraordinary powers and some extraordinary measures. And there was a lot of goodwill amongst the opposition parties to do that, recognizing the unprecedented nature of the crisis that we were facing. And what did Justin Trudeau use with that goodwill? He tried to grab an enormous amount of power. His first draft of that legislation was removing the role of Parliament in any kind of oversight. So I think we're seeing his nature being revealed here as time goes on. He's using this pandemic now twice in a way that that shows a complete disrespect to Canadians and their desire to have an open and transparent government.
Your ethics critic, Michael Barrett, just on a final point, he said earlier today there were talks between opposition leaders on maybe recalling Parliament. Is that happening? What's the status of that?
Well, as a former speaker, I believe that decision rests with the government itself. Obviously, we want Parliament to be recalled. We've wanted Parliament to come back since early April, so that we can provide the type of oversight and accountability that gets a better product for Canadians. We continue that call today. We're hoping that if the other opposition parties agree with our position on this, that we will maybe be able to shame the government into recalling Parliament, so we can have question period, we can have questions on the order paper, we can have opposition motions to try to shed more light on this.
Okay, Mr. Scheer, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so how was the decision made to award the We charity this contract, and who knew what in Cabinet about the financial links between the charity and the Prime Minister's family and the Finance Minister's family? Pablo Rodriguez is the government House Leader, and he joins me now. Minister Rodriguez, thanks for making the time.
Pleasure, David. Thanks for having me.
Were you aware, and were other ministers aware, that the Prime Minister's mother and brother had been paid for appearances on We's behalf when this decision to award the contract was taken by Cabinet?
Well, I can't get into conversations that occur in Cabinet. What I can tell you is, as a government, we made lots of decisions in this COVID context to help Canadians, and we said it from the start. You know, we chose to move fast because it was necessary, and knowing that it wouldn't be perfect all the time, and make corrections along the way, and this is one of the cases.
I'm not asking you to disclose Cabinet conversations or anything like that. I'm asking you if you knew that Margaret Trudeau and Sacha Trudeau had been paid money by We when you decided to enter into this arrangement.
Well, I don't know We much. It's not an organization that is well known here in Quebec, but as for the rest, again, I'm not going to go and get into Cabinet discussions.
Were you aware of the Finance Minister?
You already know that.
But were you aware of the Finance Minister? Well, yes, I understand that, but this is not necessarily deliberations on whether you should take the decision or not. It's a factual question. We're trying to ask the government about whether it was disclosed to the key decision makers of a financial arrangement involving the Prime Minister's mom and his brother and the Finance Minister's daughters.
Well, we received a clear recommendation for public servants that have a lot of experience in this, that knows very well the programs, the parameters, this and that they recommended the organization, and we went along.
So they recommended that to you, but did the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister disclose any of these connections to you or Cabinet before you made your decision?
Well, again, you're getting into Cabinet discussions, as you know, we can't get into that.
Okay, well, maybe can the government waive Cabinet confidence on this for the Ethics Commissioner and maybe for the committee so that people can get some clear answers on this? Because surely you can look at this and see that you have a significant problem.
Well, the commissioner is doing his inquiry, and we're going to collaborate, as we always did, by the way, David. Always did. The Prime Minister, the whole government, we collaborate in the past, and we'll do it again. But again, we have to understand that this is a program that was put in place with good faith to help young Canadians to create grants. It didn't work out the way we wanted to. And so, we made different decisions. Now the public servants were going to take care of it, but it was a clear recommendation from them, and we went along.
In the SNC-Lavalin investigation, the Ethics Commissioner complained that Cabinet confidence wasn't waived enough that I think it was 9 people were unable to speak or give testimony or give evidence. So will you look at waiving some of those exceptions as a government so there can be a fuller investigation this time? Well,
I think we gave access to to a lot of documents, which shows how transparent the government was and how transparent the government is, and we would always be transparent. There's actually a study made by the Finance Committee, and that we supported, and we'll of course collaborate as a government to everything that happens in the Finance Committee, everything that's done by the Ethics Commission. We did collaborate before, we will collaborate again. But again, David, this is a program put in place to help young Canadians, and it's something that the government does, right? Not only the federal government, but other governments too, to work with stakeholders. People are on the ground, they have networks, so it's not rare to do that.
I don't think anyone's criticizing the intentions of what you were trying to do. I think the questions are about the way that you went about doing it. And basic questions of whether or not the financial relationship between the Prime Minister's family and the charity being disclosed when you're in the decision-making process is something I think people want an answer to.
Well, there will be questions at the committees. There will be questions again in Parliament. There will be questions by the Ethics Commissioner and the government, the Prime Minister, and all of us will answer those questions, as we always did. We've been transparent, and we will be transparent, but we have to understand that we're in a COVID environment where we make decisions day by day, all the time, sometimes faster than what we would want. And we said it. Listen, it's not going to be perfect, but it's in good faith to help Canadians. And we've been doing this through all the period in different programs, and this is not different. We took the recommendations from public servants. We went along with it. Now we're making a change.
Okay, you see?
We made change in the past too, right? We adapted. We have to adapt. We're adapting now.
You and other ministers have repeated this, that you took the advice of the public service that said to you that We is really the only organization that can do that. Committees have asked to see the documents on that. Will you release all of the documents that show the advice the Cabinet received from the civil service to give documented proof supporting the claim the government is making?
All documents that can be shared will be shared, of course. I don't know which document they're going to ask. I cannot. But of course, we want to kind of collaborate fully, totally.
So the advice to Cabinet exemption under the release of documents, will that be exercised here by the Cabinet, or will you release all documents?
All documents that can be shared, David, will be shared. I can tell you that. And we always done it, right? And we're going to participate to everything that what the Finance Committee does, the Ethics Commissioner does. But again, I mean, how many programs did we put in place since day one? And sometimes, the programs were not perfect. Sometimes they were even improved by the opposition. They made suggestions. We accepted them as a whole, of government approach, as a Canadian approach. And we made those amendments, and we have no problem making those changes to make sure that things go the right way.
I understand the need to put programs out the door quickly, but this one in particular, when you look at where you are now, going into the third ethics investigation of Prime Minister Trudeau's time as Prime Minister, the lessons learned from the Aga Khan investigation, the lessons learned from the SNC-Lavalin investigation, how were they not applied here when these connections, these family connections, just seem so obvious?
Well, again, David, this is a recommendation that was made by public service, and they know who's there, they know who's on the ground, and it's not rare. We've worked with United Way, we've worked with Centraide, with many organizations. Why? Because sometimes it's the fastest way to do it.
But they're not necessarily paying money to the Prime Minister's family. I mean, the fact that the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister did not recuse themselves from this, Minister.
David, if you let me finish for a second, please. Those organizations, they have their own network. They understand what's going on, sometimes better than the government, what's going on the ground. So that's why we worked with them, and this was no different. Now, it didn't work out the way we wanted, so we made a change.
Should the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have recused themselves from the decision-making process on this?
Well, those are discussions. Again, you're going to cabinet discussions.
Well, as a matter of principle, if a cabinet minister is facing an issue of awarding a contract to a company that pays family members, speaking broadly, is that not something you should recuse yourself from?
Well, it's not broad because you're making reference to something very specific. You're taking the broad approach to talk about this again, but it's a cabinet discussion, so it has to stay in cabinet.
Okay, so right now you're dealing with a political controversy and the program itself is kind of in limbo, and we're hearing that a lot of students who are looking for volunteer placements and money don't know if they're going to get it or it could be delayed. How quickly can you get this fixed from a program administrative point of view?
Well, we'll do it as fast as possible. And we have the best public service in the world. We've shown it with CERB and wage subsidies, how we could turn around very quickly because of our public service, thanks to them. And I hope it's going to be the same. I'm pretty confident it's going to be the same, so we can deliver those programs for young Canadians. So if
the public service can do it quickly now, that has become a problem. Why couldn't they do it in the first place?
Well, it's the recommendation that we had, and sometimes it's really good to go through a stakeholder that has its networks that's been doing this for a long time. And from what I understand, I don't know we personally well, but I've heard good things about them. They have a good reputation across the country, and I think internationally too. So that's probably why the recommendation came to the government. But now our public service is going to do it, and I'm sure they're going to do it as well as they did the other programs to serve Canadians.
Okay, Pablo Rodriguez, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
So the government said it did the right thing and followed all the rules when it awarded a sole source contract to the We charity to run the $900 million student grant program. The charity backed out of administering the program last week. But controversy continues to swirl around all of this and its ties to the Trudeau family and now the Morneau family. Earlier today, we learned that Finance Minister Bill Morneau's daughter is employed by the We organization while his other daughter volunteers for the organization. Neither Morneau nor Trudeau recused themselves from cabinet discussions about the contract. Now, the Conservatives say the Prime Minister needs to be investigated by the RCMP over the situation. Does the NDP support that call? Jagmeet Singh is the party leader, and he joins me now from Montreal. Mr. Singh, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, sir.
I want to start with that question of the criminal investigation. Do you support the Conservative call to bring in the RCMP, or is this more of an ethical issue than a criminal one?
Well, I think this is an issue that calls for a really robust investigation. And I'm open to, if there's evidence that leads to a criminal investigation, absolutely. But really, we want to see a robust investigation. And that means the Prime Minister and Cabinet need to be prepared to waive all confidentiality and provide full details around what happened.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask you. The government says it's committed to openness and transparency here and insisting that it did the right thing. So what is the number one thing that the government could do right now to show you they're taking the situation seriously?
Well, first off, they have to mirror their actions to how obviously wrong this is. It's very obvious that if a government's going to award a contract of this size to an organization, there shouldn't be some basic things in place. The fact that Trudeau's family members, Prime Minister Trudeau's family members, earned upwards of $350,000 altogether. That to me is very troubling and pretty obvious that the Prime Minister should have recused himself. The fact that Finance Minister Morneau's children work, one works there, one is volunteering there. Again, that cries out for an obvious recusing, not being involved in the decision making. These are some obvious steps to then balance out how obviously wrong this is. The government needs to be very open, and that means being very transparent with waiving all confidentiality, opening up all the discussions that happened, and showing Canadians that this was done in a way that was fair, because right now it looks like the Prime Minister and the Liberal government want to help out their friends very quickly, but people like those living with disabilities continue to wait for any help at all. They've received no help, but the government moves so quickly to help an organization, really to help their friends, and that to me is what's very troubling in all this.
The government's maintaining all of this that the recommendation to go with we for the program came right out of the public service, the nonpartisan civil servants here in Ottawa. Do you believe that explanation?
Well, the problem with that explanation, it doesn't explain away why the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister wouldn't recuse themselves. If you've got a direct family financial benefit from this contract, then it would just be obvious that you disclose that and say, listen, because of that family connection, I'm going to step away for the decision to be made, and that Cabinet be advised of that. We don't know if anything of that nature happened. And the contrast I want to draw is that the Prime Minister seems to just be so quick to help out well-connected friends and help out his own family. But again, there's a massive delay for those in need, Canadians that are struggling with disabilities and have received no extra help during this pandemic. That contrast to me makes it even worse when the Prime Minister is engaging in something that is so obviously laden with conflicts of interest.
But there could be two tracks here that the civil service could have said we is the right choice for this, which would have legitimized the choice. And the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister may have made a mistake by not recusing themselves, right? So if we do find out and do get the proof and the documents that the public service said, yes, go with we, does that change your impression of all of this?
Well, no, because in the other thing that I'm deeply concerned with is why was there just one organization? There's many organizations, UNICEF and many other non-government organizations that the government could have chosen. But more than that, what I'm deeply troubled with is why couldn't the public service, why did this need to be outsourced? The public service does an incredible job in terms of managing finances, managing the CERB, sending out money to Canadians. Why couldn't the public service, completely transparent, completely public, manage the delivery of funds to students? They do that all the time. That to me is also the really at the heart of why this makes no sense in the beginning, and it makes it even worse when there's so many layers of connections, personal, family benefit that can be drawn from this contract. All of this is just something that makes Canadians really cringe at how wrong it all seems.
The Bloc Québécois, who I know you're not necessarily getting on with these days, has said that the Prime Minister should step aside while these investigations are being conducted. Does anything you've seen warrant that kind of extreme step by Justin Trudeau?
Well, I think that the focus should be on the investigation, and I would like to put my pressure in terms of if I'm calling for something, I want the government, I want Prime Minister Trudeau and the Liberal Cabinet to waive all confidentiality, disclose everything that happened around this, because there are just far too many questions that are unanswered, and Canadians are still, like I mentioned, Canadians with disabilities, seniors got one payment. There's so many people that are struggling. In August, we know that there's still going to be many people that can't go back to work. They're worried about their futures, and Prime Minister Trudeau and Finance Minister Morneau seem worried about their own family rather than Canadians, and trying to help out people in a way, or help out their well-connected friends instead of helping out Canadians. That to me is really troubling. So I want full disclosure and full transparency. That's where I'm focusing on.
And we should add that Charlie Angus, your ethics critic, has written the ethics commissioner asking that the investigation be expanded to include Bill Morneau based on the revelations today. But one of the things that Conservatives have mentioned is that you kind of need Parliament to deal with issues like this. Parliament is closed in part because your party supported the Liberals on suspending normal operations because of the health concerns of COVID-19. Now that we've seen what's happened, does Parliament need to be recalled? Do you regret agreeing to go along with that suspension? And should you get back in there to have question periods and examinations?
Well, we negotiated 4 extra sitting days that would never have happened otherwise. Normally, in the summertime, Parliament is closed so that people can go back to their ridings and meet with constituents. So we've got 3 more days of Parliament right now this summer that have been because of our negotiations, because of what we've been able to achieve. So we'll use that time there. We're going to continue to raise this concern with in the media. And really, this is on the Liberal government to disclose what happened. We need to have a full investigation, and we'll continue to push for that. I'm open to the idea of Parliament recalling to ask questions on this because of the severity of what's coming out, and we'll look forward to seeing if that is something that can happen in the near future.
Just one final question before I let you go. What message does it send to Canadians and to parliamentarians if the Liberals do not waive cabinet confidence on documents and information for the Ethics Commissioner or the various committees investigating this?
Well, because of how blatant the wrong here is, how blatantly obvious it is that it's wrong for the government to give money to an organization where there's a direct financial benefit to close family members. Because of how obvious that is, it would be a flagrant violation of the trust that Canadians have in government, particularly the Liberal government, and particularly given the fact that Canadians with disabilities have had to wait for help, but the government, Liberal government, Prime Minister Trudeau moves so quickly to help out their close friends and to financially benefit those very close to them while connected to them, while other Canadians have to struggle. That, to me, I think is a flagrant offense to the importance of the role of being a Prime Minister and being in government.
Okay. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.